And good morning and welcome to this edition of the Friday Focus. Thank you for joining us again. We are fast approaching our 50th episode, and there'll be a little bit of celebration around that episode when we get to it in a few weeks' time. But thank you for joining us here today, the 20th of March, 2026. But this is a recorded version of the show. The people that we're talking to, making sure that they're available and bring their expertise to the table. You know that we say that the Friday Focus is all about joining the conversation. Normally, if we're live, we would encourage you on LinkedIn or YouTube to engage in the conversation and put your comments up. Because this is a recorded show, we won't be responding live on the screen, but we will respond wherever you put your commentary. There's 26,000 followers now on LinkedIn, many of whom are joining in on the show. Thank you for your support. Again, don't forget, like, share, and subscribe. It does help us in building the conversation. And we know that the show is seen around the world. We know the Middle East and the Far East. We've people sending us messages from all over the world. So we really appreciate your support and your engagement. And please do share with your colleagues, because this really is about joining a conversation about what we believe. This moral purpose that we have around educating the next generations. So please do get involved in this conversation. So like, share, and subscribe the various different platforms that we're on. I think currently LinkedIn is the major place, YouTube, Spotify, and Substack. And you'll know that the Smart Curriculum Network newsletters are going out from Substack and email. If you go to our website, details at the bottom of the screen, smartcurriculum.net, sign up to the newsletter and see what we're talking about and the conversations that we are getting involved in. Now, that's enough of the advertising. Now we want to come to the conversation. So my guest this morning is, I've asked Marcelo Starikov to come back and join me. He's doing some really interesting stuff. So Marcelo, thank you for being here. Introduce yourself. Tell us a bit, for those that are hearing for the first time. We've had conversations before, very fruitful and positive conversations, but just give a bit of introduction to yourself.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much for inviting me back to the Friday Focus. And I must say that the first one still lives in my memory.
Remarkable conversation.
Constantly. It was so wonderful. So I'm really looking forward to the hour ahead with yourself, and very warm welcome to all our wonderful listeners as well. So I'm Marcelo Starikov. I'm currently an assistant professor in education at the University of Sussex. And I have been here sort of 6 years or so, and I teach on the BA Primary and Early Years course with QTS, and I also lead the Masters in Education course, which is really fascinating. And also, really interestingly, Chris, I've now been given since September the remit of leading the experiences and program of the Boleshak scholars who come to our university every year from Kazakhstan, having applied. They are academics, successful in their careers, and they're here because they have been successful in applying to what's called the Boleshak Scholarship Scheme in Kazakhstan, which is something be really interesting to explore further with you today. The government of Kazakhstan has got a big pot of money under the Boleshak scheme, and it allows academics to apply for it and to then be given the opportunity to travel and to spend 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year in another institution. And Sussex is one of those that is very has a long history in having that partnership with the Boleshak scholars, and it's been absolutely amazing having now the remit of coordinating their program, enriching their experience whilst they're here, and then making links to their own practice and their own institutions in Kazakhstan,
Yes.
which we'll explore a little bit further in terms of how that's developing from a departmental perspective and linked now to the British Council. So,
Yeah.
so that's really, really interesting. And prior to coming to university, I was a primary school teacher, and until recently, a primary school head teacher. And during that time in education, I developed a philosophy of education and of school leadership and sort of educational leadership, which has now become known as the joy of not knowing. And really delighted that it's now a book published by Routledge. Is now in its 5th year, and has opened so many doors, Chris.
Absolutely.
In terms of what we will chat about today, and in terms of sharing that idea of good practice, in terms of practice that transcends the international platform.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of things are designed to be particularly applicable to one system or one curriculum or one sort of organization or culture. But I think, without realizing, I think what has come out of the Joy of Not Knowing philosophy is that they are principles that can be applied anywhere. And as I'll describe, in between headship and the university, I had the most amazing opportunity to work as a UNICEF consultant to enable the government and the Ministry of Education in Uzbekistan to introduce a new reformed curriculum, which came as a decree from the president. And what he wanted was to introduce a new national curriculum in Uzbekistan that focused on creative thinking.
And that's the difference. I mean, I'd like to just emphasize and come back to that, Marcelo, because I think that you're on a roll there. But just so, The Joy of Not Knowing is the book. You can find it on Amazon, or you buy it in your bookshelf. But it's a very interesting contrast, isn't it? Because we celebrate that, you know, in a sense, you could describe it as the joy of knowing. I know stuff, and therefore I get awarded. But the philosophy is different, isn't it? I know there's a subtle difference. The joy of not knowing and the drive, it's a philosophical difference, isn't it? It's that difference to, I'm secure that I may not know, but I could.
Completely, Chris, completely. And I love the way that you've enveloped it within the philosophical concept, because that's the idea of the title, that it provokes, it's a provocation in terms of what we mean by the purpose of education and what we value about education. And you're so insightful, Chris, with your thinking, because the link to knowledge is fascinating, and the whole purpose of coining the phrase "the joy of not knowing" was to communicate the really deeply felt passion that I have, that in education, what we are seeking is not just knowledge, but it's an understanding of that knowledge once it's acquired, and the curiosity to then develop the wisdom that enables us to apply that knowledge and that understanding for the good of society. So what the joy of not knowing does is it enables children from very, very young, and people of all ages, to realize that in order to learn something new, we have to not know it first. So it plays around with the idea of one always feeling that we're wanting to know the answer. We feel happiest when we can answer a question, when we're not placed in a position of not knowing or uncomfort, we tend to feel better.
Mm.
But in but if we think about the process of learning, by definition, the process of learning launches with placing the learner in a position of not knowing what they're about to learn.
Yes. Yes.
So it's a really interesting twist in terms of making that very explicit within the educational system and the educational environment, so that people are really aware that they're in a position of not knowing, in the sense that they're then enthusiastic to want to know it.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's the key, rather than
Yep.
thinking that it's something to do with celebrating not knowing in terms of ignorance. But there's a really interesting dichotomy here, Chris, that when we are in a position of not knowing and we realize that we're in a position of not knowing. So, for example, in the classroom, as soon as the teacher says, today we're going to learn about X, Y, Z, the students are placed by definition in a position of not knowing what they're about to learn.
Mm.
And what I find really fascinating is that at that stage, each child, whether consciously or unconsciously, has has an option. They can either want to know it, or they may not be interested in knowing it.
Mm.
Yeah, and we, throughout our lives, we face that dichotomy all the time. There are hundreds of things every day that we come across that we know we don't know, and
Yeah.
some of them we might be interested to want to know them, and some of the things we might not be interested in
Yep.
wanting to
Yep.
know them. So in education, what we're trying to do is to drive the learner down the dichotomy line of wanting to know it.
Yep.
So the whole approach is based on intrinsic motivation. And
Isn't that's so fascinating, because in a knowledge-driven
yes,
kind of economy, those that know have the power, and those that don't know perceive that they don't have power. So if you're dealing with learners later in their journey, there is a real feeling of disempowerment because I don't know. What
yes,
you're suggesting is that kind of drive to, I may not know it, but I can know it. That's
yes,
a very different philosophical position to stand, isn't it? And the
yes,
motivation that drives you is
yes,
different at that point.
yes, definitely. And yeah, absolutely right. But also, what I'm trying to communicate is that the power really lies in knowing what you don't know. So,
Yes. Yes.
so it's in knowing that you have um, a, a very strong foundation of knowledge to begin with,
Mm.
but that knowledge is driving your curiosity to get to know things that you don't know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I think the most powerful position to be in as a human and as a citizen
Mhm.
is to not be content with just the knowledge that you have, like,
Yes.
and just to feel like you're like an encyclopedia that's just knowledge, but to use that self knowledge that you've got to drive your curiosity and your inquisitiveness and your enthusiasm for wanting to know
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the key. And when that's set up in the classroom, it's just so incredible, because it develops classrooms that function as, first of all, communities of inquiry, where everyone's happy to take risks with their thinking, explore ideas, always based on their previous knowledge. So
Mm.
it's really, really interesting. Um, but also it develops that sense of innate curiosity that I think
Mm.
children are born with. So in a
Yes.
way, we're nurturing that innate curiosity,
Yeah.
and getting individuals to feel that the learning is something they want to engage with because it has meaning to their lives. And I must share with you that all of this thinking was really, really fundamental to my initial formation as a teacher, for two reasons. One was meeting the most incredibly inspirational person that I could have met very early on in my career, called John West Burnham, who was always so amazing at expressing how the purpose of education is to do with moral purpose and creating better societies, and the actual purpose of education. And the other one was to do with the fact that before I became a teacher at 30, so I changed careers at 30. And before that, I was a research scientist. So I came into education with a formation of a research scientist, which is really fascinating because as a research scientist, your whole thinking and your way of being and your whole approach to everyday life and your professional life is to try and explore things, to try and explore and to try and solve problems that no one has an answer to. And that's a really, really fascinating position to be in, because you start to feel, doing research, you start to feel very comfortable with uncertainty and with not knowing, which is what was so useful when I came into education, to try and transfer that sense of excitement for not knowing and for investigating and for experimenting with the children as part of the everyday life in the classroom. Rather than establishing a system where everything was based on delivering knowledge and having the right, and for the children to think they had to always work towards a right answer.
And that's quite a fundamental thing. I mean, we're dealing with that in terms of measuring knowledge, and I often talk and have done shows and podcasts on that very matter. We value what we measure, and we measure what we value, and it's a question of what we value that's the baseline. So look, this conversation was to kind of to move us into kind of this global position, and your experience. You've just talked about Uzbekistan, and I interrupted you as you were just saying they wanted to revisit their curriculum and look at creativity. Now I know I've been in resonance in what you've just been saying with Ken Robinson and Bill Lucas and others that are I should say Sir Ken Robinson and Professor Bill Lucas in terms of creativity. There are things going on here, and I know conversations that I'm having with school leaders around the world. There's a view, there's this kind of, as you described it a minute, with this, so not only the dichotomy against what you know and what you don't know, it's the driving for knowledge-centered curriculum, and what appears to be the kind of opposing line about this creativity, because but my view is you can have both. It's not either or. So tell us a little bit about what's going on in your work with the Bolshak work and what's going on in Uzbekistan. Just describe it, because you got involved in the curriculum redesign.
Completely by chance. But just picking up on something really interesting that you've just mentioned. When you say that there's room for both, I believe that they are inseparable. I believe that the way to knowledge is through creativity.
Agree.
Absolutely. And the way to progress is through innovation and creative thinking. I think I've never looked at the kind of thinking skills aspect as separate from the acquisition of knowledge. I've always believed that that they're so inseparable, and that one leads to the other.
Mm.
So by having really interesting ideas, by being really intrinsically motivated and interested in pursuing, you develop the knowledge in a much more meaningful way than if you're just learning by heart. And I guess I have to share with the audience that my upbringing was in Buenos Aires in Argentina. My primary school till I was 11 I lived there, and I guess that's exactly what I'm trying to address, because my whole memory of primary education was learning by heart and learning through just learning facts and reciting them by heart, which was just acquiring knowledge.
Yeah.
I always give the example. I know we'll chat a little bit about maths later on. I love maths, it's a real passion of mine. And I was in Buenos Aires, I was really, in my primary school, I was really good at always getting the answer right. But I promise you, looking back, I had no idea of the understanding behind what I was achieving. I could do it mechanically.
Yeah.
So a lot of the thinking around the joy of not knowing is that knowledge is always accompanied by understanding, and always accompanied by the wisdom to use that in a purposeful way. So so that's really interesting.
It is. From my background, I trained as a teacher in the mid 80s or early 80s. I trained as a teacher, but my training was in product design. So I designed. I was a designer by study. I mean, I learned, even from my namesake, J. Christopher Jones, the design process. But what I agree with you entirely, because if you take any of the innovative inventors that are in the system now, James Dyson, for example, some of the technology and the application of technology comes from really, really good understanding, certainly pneumatics and airflow, that we've got new devices because they've taken time to study and understand what's happening. So you can't, in my thinking, you cannot separate knowledge from creativity. In fact, more creativity comes from getting deeper into it. So I don't think it is. All right, I agree. It is not either or. It's that blend, but neither is it one without the other.
Yes,
you can't
exactly.
have knowledge.
Exactly.
That's the kind of thinking process.
Exactly. And there's also a really lovely phrase which always drives me, which is that comfort is the enemy of progress. So if we are seeking comfort, and the default position as a human being is to seek comfort, and children very much try to seek comfort once they're at school, if we always stay, in what's known as a comfort zone, or sort of seeking, then progress is very limited. So that sense of making children and learners and adults feel comfortable with being uncomfortable, I think is the key to education, to unlocking that drive.
It's that just because I don't know doesn't mean I've failed, which is the word I use. It's I'm uncomfortable that I don't know, but I'm comfortable that I can know.
Exactly. And the key to that then is that the child feels that they have everything they need to be able to thrive in the situation of uncertainty.
Yes.
So if they feel they have all their needs met, culturally, linguistically, academically, socially, so that's what I call the community of inquiry in the classroom, where everyone feels safe to take risks, to experiment, but also to feel that they have everything they need to be able to thrive in as an individual, as a learner. Then they'll feel excited to not know, because they'll realize that they'll be able to succeed.
And that's an environment that I'd certainly, that's represented in the book, isn't it? That community of learning is fundamental to the approach of a teacher. That's the pedagogical and environmental responsibility of a teacher, isn't it?
Absolutely. That responsibility to nurture in children's innate curiosities. I believe children are born philosophical and curious. Exactly, is exactly our duty. But then to make those communities of inquiry full or rich in pupil agency is amazing, because
Mm.
then you start to drive each lesson and each sort of area that you're looking at through children's interests, rather than through strict planning that needs to be delivered. And that sense of co-construction, as I call the co-construction of the learning process. And at the university here, we talk a lot about adaptive teaching with our
Mm.
students,
Mm.
and it's a really difficult concept to um, for them to engage with, because they plan their lessons and they tend to deliver the plan,
Mm.
but that sort of postgraduate, postdoctoral ability to adapt to, if a child makes a comment, to just go down that route and
Yeah.
feel that
Yeah.
sense of professional freedom to explore and experiment.
And
And when that,
that's an interesting concept. Sorry, Marcel.
no,
That's
that's
interesting.
brilliant.
I mean, certainly, I know with my dealing with teachers in a leadership position, it is, to getting them to be the curator of the experience, not just the
Yes,
curator of the knowledge.
yes,
So you're not
yes,
just there to deliver the knowledge, but you are actually taking the child along the path where they might have some self-discovery, or you might help
yes,
them too. But that's a very different mindset for a teacher in a classroom to hold. That's the
yeah,
theory of
yeah.
adaptive teaching entirely, isn't it? That's
Yeah,
sorry, I cut
absolutely.
you off
Yeah,
there. I didn't mean to.
absolutely. Yeah. So so with all of this, when the book came out, there was an amazing chance meeting with a lovely person who I just met at a conference just over a coffee, who is involved in creating textbooks for Central Asian countries. So it's kind of textbook um, kind of creator
Mm.
person. And just in conversation, he said that UNICEF were looking for consultants to to help the Ministry of Education in Uzbekistan to integrate a reform primary curriculum into the country about 6 or 7 years ago. So I got in touch, and I'm very lucky to have been given the opportunity. And it was so incredible, Chris, because it was a culture that I had never ever had any contact with or experience with in any way. And the first thing that was really fascinating was we looked at the decree of the president, and the way that the introduction to the national curriculum was so fascinating, in terms of it was all to do with purpose of education rather than the process of teaching and learning. So it was
Mm.
really, it's an amazing document. And within that, the way to implement that, which was UNICEF's role, was to make the learning outcome skills based rather than knowledge based. So it was a skills based wish to integrate into the sort of the aims of all the subjects,
Mm.
it's sort of the learning outcomes of all the subjects. And it was really, really fascinating. So I started to, I contributed quite substantially to the overall introduction, which was really interesting. And then I was given the remit of working with the mathematics um, leadership team, and to try and develop their mathematics curriculum, and then the textbooks to deliver that curriculum. So it's very textbook based society. So all the teaching and learning is done through textbooks. Is much more than
Mm.
in Britain. So they have textbooks for every year, which the teacher uses to deliver.
Mm.
And when I came to them, when I looked at them and I came to them, it was really, really interesting that they were very traditional, lots of questions to do that had a specific answer, and lots of practice of the same. So it's what in my earlier days in working in the thinking skills world, we used to call MOTS, more of the same.
Yes.
Whereas I've been really interested on HOTS, which is higher order thinking skills. So we say, and we use that a lot to get teachers to focus on when they're offering challenge to the children, so the child finishes, rather than giving them more of the same. Particularly with able children, it's much more exciting to give them something that makes them think creatively. So, and more of the same leads to disaffection and disinterest in what you're doing. Yeah. And able children who are given more of the same, when they finish, they do another page or do more of the same, they feel they've been punished. Yes. So they're very good at pacing themselves to just finish on time. But if there is a very interesting creative thinking task at the end that makes them use what they've learned in a different context and in a really, that sort of intellectual playfulness, then they really want to get there as quickly as possible, and all the other children want to get there as quickly as possible as well. So it's incredibly motivational. Yeah. So I found that it was traditional in that sense. It was also traditional in terms of values, and I know that you're really interested in that whole multicultural values that in having this international exchange, one can share the thinking with them, not impose, but share different ideas, which is what I was enjoying. So, for example, I developed, and now their mathematics textbooks have got really interesting introductions through questioning to their topics, and a lot of that questioning I've trying to promote that it's philosophical. So, for example, is it a good time to share an example?
I just going to say to you, just let's pause for let's come back on that example. So hold that for a second, and we'll start I need to do that kind of break in the conversation, but I will. Fabulous. I just want to sum this little bit up, and that's so important around the kind of mindset of the teacher, and what what you're speaking to is kind of this move in the modern, actually almost postmodern, the asynchronicity of it, not assuming that every child is at the same point, but actually starting at different points, so graduated change. But all of that comes out of that conversation around, where are children, and me as a curator, I don't hold all the knowledge that I'm going to pass on to you, because that ignores the fact that you might have some of that knowledge. Exactly. And I need to respect that as I bring it in. So there's a deep conversation here about who the teacher is. But Marcelo, I must do this bit. So just pause for a second, and then I'll be with you in a moment. So thank you. If you're here listening to the conversation, please do. I will put this on the screen, the like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on YouTube or Substack and Spotify. They're out there for you to join us. Please do get involved in the conversation. If you go to the website, you can see the first thing that comes up is sign up to the newsletter and get involved in the conversation. And as Marcelo has been saying, I am interested in what's going on around the world. I spoke to one of our leaders in England some time ago and said, do you, in terms of what you're saying and looking at, do you look around the world? And the answer was no, I'm too busy. And in a sense, it's a shame that is true. And no criticism of the person, but that's, that is how we are. We get so involved in what we're doing that it gets so busy. So a lot of what we're doing is about trying to get us thinking about some ways forward. Now, you know, the work of Smart Curriculum is here, so please, you know, go to the website and see the things that we're doing. But just because this is significant for me after doing this for some while, the book, The Perfect Timetable, which I've been working on for a number of years, you know, I think, you know, hundreds and hundreds of timetables that I've been involved with secondary schools and increasingly primary schools. It's not a book about how to use software. It's a book about the values behind it and what we're trying, the lived experience of children and what we want that to be. So the QR code is there on the screen. If you want to go and look on Amazon, please go and find the book. But it's about the values. I refer to it's an approach to the dark art for those that fear it. It's for everybody who's involved in putting a logistical structure around a school life, whether that be primary, secondary, all through, or wherever you are. So please get involved. It's on YouTube. It's on Amazon. Please do get a copy if you feel so inclined. So let's get back to this conversation, Marcelo. So you were talking about maths, and you were talking about this philosophical approach to maths. So talk us through the example that I interrupted you and you were going to share.
No, that's fascinating. A huge congratulations on The Perfect Timetable.
Thank you.
Chris, I'm just so honored to be with you on the day of its publication, and I can't wait to read it. And just an amazing coincidence, just before our recording, I recorded another session with our first year students here who were their assessment is to make a film. So they came and we created they interviewed me for their film in terms of philosophy in primary schools.
Mm.
And one of the things I was saying to them is that when I was a teacher in Bristol, I used to have philosophy on a Friday morning as part of the timetable. So this very nice link to your thing. You know, it was actually the most exciting hour of the week when, you know, we just dedicated it to
and it's the things that we value and what is, I mean, because so many people see the subject mindset of, you know, in national curriculum in England is 14 subjects, and they're in this cycle of things. You'll see those things, and even in primary schools, you'll see that, you know, the big maths and the big English and where they sit, and you need to timetable it in and make sure that this, you know, that all of that has a reflection on our values and what we purpose and what we want. And
absolutely,
and that's what the book is about. And I'm here to advertise that. We're here to talk about yours, but
exciting.
It's about making people think.
Yeah.
So come on, let's come to this.
They were quizzing me. They were saying, but how can you have it in your timetable if it's not in the national curriculum? And I said,
that's a good question.
And it was a good question. And my answer was that I taught the whole of the national curriculum through that philosophy lesson. Yeah. We covered everything in national curriculum through discussing things philosophically. So, and also developing that sense of dialogue, talk, mutual respect, creative thinking, critical thinking, problem solving. It was all in that hour. So just
on that, and I'm sorry, we bat our things at each other, but when I've done an analysis on schools, whether it be primary or secondary or wherever, you get that one thing. You just said it there, you know. So even something like Guy Claxton's Building Learning Power, and I go and I look at a school and I see a lesson called Building Learning Power, and I see them doing geography. And I'm saying, well, why aren't you doing that in geography? Why do you need Building Learning Power and then geography? That doesn't matter. So it is really challenging the way we think about, we granularize curriculum to a point. And we do it even with maths, don't we? We do. It's the maths lesson and never the twain shall meet.
Yeah.
But actually maths is everywhere. And you're going to say that. Let's get to this example.
I'm so glad you mentioned Guy Claxton, because, you know, I worked with him to introduce the lifelong learning dispositions.
Yes.
And with Ruth Diggin-Crick, and Learning Power in Practice, which is the book that emerged from that, is really fascinating. So that whole idea of integrating the lifelong learning dispositions as part of the daily teaching and learning process is also real passion. Maybe we could,
Foundational to what you're doing,
yeah,
really, isn't it?
yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And I then developed the idea of linking them to an animal. So lots of schools now have like the resilient tortoise and, you know, all that sort of
Yeah.
thing, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Yes.
really amazing. But maybe
That's another
a
conversation.
future one. Yeah. So the example is, so for example, if you are presenting the learning to the students as a statement, so for example, if you want to teach about 2D shape, two-dimensional shapes, the learning objective may be something like to be able to study the properties of two-dimensional shape, or to be able to learn about the properties of two-dimensional shape, or to be able to learn the properties of a triangle. You know, that's a statement which is a very common way of expressing it.
Mm.
What I've been playing around with, and I find really transformational in so many ways, is to turn that statement into a question, and to turn it into a can we question. So you immediately removing the worry, because in to be able to, lots of children may think, I can't, I've never been able to, you know, it's kind of it can lead to sort of some negative connotations. If the introduction to the learning objective is can we investigate the properties of two-dimensional shape, you immediately create in that community of inquiry, and that sense of all of us being together trying to work out, and like you say, bring in everyone's knowledge and interest in before you launch. So that's really fantastic. But once I was doing the learning objectives as a question, I then thought, well, let's try and make that question really thought-provoking and philosophical. So in that example, you might launch the lesson with a question such as, do two-dimensional shapes exist? Okay. And it's just so fascinating, Chris, because first of all, they find it really funny. Like you take a few seconds to kind of really conceptualize and think of this really funny question the teacher's asking. And then you really start to try and unravel the concepts behind a philosophical question, whichever it is, to launch a lesson is absolutely amazing, because you start to, as a teacher, develop all the means of seeing where the children's understanding is, or like you say, their actual knowledge and depth of knowledge, because some of them may engage with that question if they have huge knowledge, which children often have about certain things, in depths that even I'd never imagined or thought of. And some of them may give you a very engage with it in a way that they're sure that they're right, because it's what they've always thought. But once they say it in this context, you realize that it's a misconception. So, for example, they say, Mr. S, of course they exist, and they go to their drawer, which is labeled 2D shapes, and they go and bring me a flat triangle or a flat square or a flat circle. And they say, here it is, this is the 2D shape, which of course is not.
No, because it's got a third dimension. Yeah.
So
you pick it up.
yes, so they go through their whole lives, and even teachers thinking that those flat ones are 2D. So it's a really interesting way of exploring and kind of introducing that intrinsic, that real motivation and love for learning and love for discovery. It's such a wonderful way in. So when I started to work with the Uzbekistan sort of the ministry and the leaders of the mathematics curriculum, I started to share all these ideas with them, and they were really fascinated by trying to introduce a more creative thinking approach to mathematics. And I combined that with a more problem-solving approach, So, for example, if they are learning to add, because I was doing grade 1 to grade 4, so we were looking at sort of addition, 1 add 2 add 3, for example. I was saying to them that you can have, as I picked up, they had pages and pages and pages of those types of stuff. But I said, what you could do is then have, okay, 5 or 6 of those. They mechanically they understand the concept, they can get, and then say to them underneath. So we added a section where it's kind of a little challenge. How many combinations of 1 and 2 or 3 can you think of that all have the answer 6? So we're starting to really develop fun and understanding that mathematics, it doesn't matter which way around the numbers, it works. So they had to
You're developing patterns and rules, aren't you? You're establishing that thought that there are.
And then the final extension, which also became part of the home learning approach that was encouraging, so it was linked to to creative thinking at home, was to give them a 3x3 empty square, and the numbers 3 1s, 3 2s, and 3 3s, where they have to populate those 9 squares so that every row, every column, and every diagonal adds up to 6. So they're doing exactly the same as the traditional 1 or 2 or 3, but in a very, very playful way, and in a way that is they're using their understanding to solve a problem. So it's what, in those 3 scenarios, what I called moving from knowledge to understanding to wisdom. So that third one is that wisdom that you're able to solve a problem, and the satisfaction of when you actually get the answer and it all works is incredible. But it doesn't stop there, because once you create that the answer where it all works, you start to think about, what number did I use in the middle? What numbers are in the corners? That sense of mathematical pattern and understanding. So the middle one is always, in any sequence, has to be the middle sequence, because it's the one that appears most in. So
and that's important then about developing confidence with numbers, isn't it? Because I know I've said to you before, the number of school leaders that I go and work with when we're doing finances or we're doing spreadsheets or something, and they'll say, well, I'm really not happy with numbers, I don't do numbers. But you wouldn't dream of them saying the same with words. But it's that developing the confidence to handle number and think about number in that way. And what you're doing is giving them children that base of confidence, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing which is really interesting that I think has made a significant impact is that, well, first of all, I tried to remove stereotypes of the pictures. The male-female stereotype that was very obvious, introduced a lot of diversity in those pictures. So, that sense. But then I also, and healthy eating, a lot of their examples were cakes or pizzas, kind of, so trying to change that, that tradition. But also to personalize it to their culture and to their society and to their lives. So I remember Googling the Uzbekistan First Division table, and using that within one of the textbooks, where they looking at lots of patterns and addings, loads of maths around, but using their actual teams. It just became a really, really fascinating way of contributing kind of exciting things that they could incorporate into the good practice they were already having. It wasn't, I was very aware not to impose kind of ideas that were not part of their system.
That isn't that inherent in your approach as a values-driven educator? When you your experience and your life experience that you've shared, so once Iris into Bristol and and now being invited into other countries. I know from my experience of working with others. I mean, so just shouting out for those that I'm talking to, saying, the National Challenge Bank, this idea of having challenges that children can approach, and it's very linked to what you're doing, but being culturally competent in that. There are things that don't fit elsewhere, and you just said, and I personally believe that cultural competency is something that we do need to be teaching and exposing our young people to. Particularly absolutely. In England, where we are with the attitudes at the moment, it's really something that needs to be championed.
Yeah, absolutely. And this work then, when I came to Sussex, with a link that Sussex has with Central Asia, became really fascinating, Chris, because it first of all led to a knowledge exchange grant that I applied for and got from the university to go to Uzbekistan, because all my work had been online. So actually, then with that grant, I went and met everyone in person and worked with their pedagogical institutes and with their schools, and
makes it real, doesn't it? It's
real.
Yeah.
But that was such an amazing experience, because I was going into early year settings and schools where it was a dream for the children. It was absolutely incredible to see the practice that they had, and nursery, preschool, because they start a bit later. So preschool covers up to 6, 7. The creativity with which, there's one in particular that I've become really close to. The head teacher developed every single resource herself, from natural products, from local products, everything. You walk around the school, everything, and everything was an experience for the children to involve themselves in the traditional games, with scenarios, with environments, all to do with our EY, it's the kind of EYFS equivalent.
EYFS,
But it's so amazing. So I've every time I've just come back from a second visit this last couple of weeks, I come back with so many ideas from them as well, and so many ways of how to lead really, really values-driven classrooms and environments. They are amazing at the values that they place within the educational provision, which is fascinating. But then the other really interesting thing that's developed is the link with the British Council. So we have at Sussex developed, have kind of a long tradition with the Kazakh National Women's Teacher Training University in Almaty. And we've now we use that link with them to formalize it. And the British Council has now funded us 2 projects, one last year in Kazakhstan and one this year, just now in Uzbekistan, where we go for a week or so and deliver a course for future leaders of inclusive English language learning. So that's the kind of focus. But this is fascinating, Chris. We did it last year in Almaty. When we applied to repeat it again this year, what we said to the British Council was, what we really want to do now is not just to come in as experts from us, but we want to work and co-deliver with colleagues from the National Women's Teacher Training Institute. And it was an amazing experience. We've just come back, co-delivering it, sharing those international values was so fascinating. And I think it gave it so much more credence and so much more meaning to doing it together.
That practice of peers working together, we expect it in the classroom, but it's still quite rare at the teacher and teacher training level, isn't it? And what you're describing is so powerful. We know, from a learning point of view, we learn from our peers. We do.
Yes.
So, it's so good to hear it, Marcelo.
Yes. and it's quite a lot of. We're hoping for a third year, so I'll keep you informed, Chris, next year.
Yeah, please do.
And there's a really, really big focus on inclusion. So pedagogy that leads to inclusion, and also courses that or sessions that we offer that leads to leadership of that once we leave. So that's one of the really big aspects is how we create the conditions in which they're then able to lead the change themselves and according to their context. So yeah, absolutely, so fascinating and so interesting to have this kind of international discourse and sharing of ideas and opportunities to.
And it's part of the human condition, isn't it? I mean, it is being human, and actually that's why I put it up on the below us. You know, that's smart curriculum. That is what we're about. You know, empowering leaders to achieve the exceptional.
Yes,
I genuinely believe that these podcasts and these conversations and Marcelo Ag, you know, kind of working together. And I hope there's opportunity to do more together because it really is impactful. But you know, this idea that we can impact the next generation of leaders, but it's going to be thinking differently. It is going to be approaching it differently. Now, I know we're very nearly an hour, Marcelo. As ever, we've talked. I think we've covered most of what we said that we were going to get into, and I dare say there's still more to come. I usually end the conversation with the question, and if there was one thing that you could change, but I'm going to ask it slightly differently. If there was one thing that you could impact by the work that you're doing, what would your ambition be?
I've been thinking a lot about this question, Chris, and my wish for the world is for every country to develop the Bolishak scheme, if possible. So Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan place education at the heart of society. I don't know how to express that enough, but it's just so valued and so much at the heart of society, and the fact that they have the opportunities, they give the opportunities for scholars to experiment, to come and experience other educational systems and be. A lot of the Bolsheviks that we get is the first time ever they've been out of Kazakhstan. It's really fascinating. But I'm thinking globally, if that was the norm, if every country had, I think Kazakhstan have 68 or so a year, if that was the norm, in terms of once you've reached 6-7 years in your profession, the norm is to you're given one of these scholarships or the opportunity to visit, to live to go abroad for a year, and then to bring the richness of that international collaboration that would exist. I think would be so enriching, and I think it would enable, because education for me is just it's just we're all globally is we're all in the same, but that sense of co-constructing, like I do with the children in the classroom, educational vision, purpose and values internationally, would it have such an
impact on some of the conversations and some of the sort of geopolitical stuff that's going on at the moment, without getting into that? It would, wouldn't it? Because we know, that Malalia in Afghanistan and what she's done, and I know, we could list other countries that have Estonia and what's happening there.
Yes,
I fear for some countries that are just putting lots of investment in EdTech, because EdTech isn't the answer. It's part of an answer, but don't just put all your eggs in one basket. But the ethic you've just talked of there, so Malaysia and that Malaysian peninsula, they love taking sabbaticals and going off in learning. So there are resonances of that around the world, aren't there?
Yes.
That's something to work
Yeah.
on. That's a wonderful thing to think that we could change. Marcelo, I am sorry we're going to have to wind up our conversation because we've got to an hour, and as ever we could talk on for ages. I just want to thank you for sharing your experience of what's gone on, and come back at some point and we'll talk further. I'll be working with Marcelo in various ways over the next few months, so it'd be good to keep the conversation going, and we will share that through LinkedIn. But just for the moment, Marcelo, thank you, and I'll just need to close the show because we've got to our hour, and we'll talk in a moment. So just thank you for being here. Really intriguing conversation about the joy of not knowing and values-based learning, and where we were starting this, the kind of international perspective on values-led leadership. And that's really, we came to that at the end of the conversation. That's really key to where we're going. So all that we say about Smart Curriculum Network empowering leaders to achieve the exceptional, that genuinely is our goal. So thank you for being here. Be here for the next episode. Share, like, and subscribe, and do get involved in the conversation. We'll see you soon.